You guys hear that? Yes. All right, glad you heard it. Hey, welcome to the journey. We are really glad that you are with us this Sunday morning. A cool thing happened between services. We had Mason Casey, who was baptized today, so it was really cool to watch that young man take a big step in his spiritual journey, and glad we got to celebrate with him. Another celebration is I am taunting all the Virginia Cavalier fans out there today. Big win by the Demon Deacons. Most of you probably don't even care about that, but I do. And from what I can tell, it was an ugly game. Didn't get to watch it because I have YouTube TV, which is in a dispute with Disney and ESPN. So I got my Saturdays back, which has been kind of nice. Speaking of college sports, we know that a lot of college athletes actually end up going and playing professional ball, whatever that may be. And so I'm just fascinated with the talent and abilities professional athletes have. It's just incredible what they are able to do. But I'm also fascinated with the amount of money they make, right? And so I did a little research. I looked at the top 4 sports leagues here in the United States. I wanted to see what do these people make. So we're going to throw these up on the screen. The average salary, okay, for each one of these sports groups. NHL, $4 million, average salary a year. Major League Baseball, $4.6 million. NFL, $5.2 million. NBA, the average salary is $12 million a year. Yeah, exactly. The lesson is, when your child is born, give them a basketball, right? But before you buy that basketball, before you buy that first hoop, there's something else to consider. The length of time these individuals actually play their sports. Because if you look at the average length of time most of these athletes play their professional sport, here's what you have. Look at these numbers. NFL players, only 3.3 years. NBA, 4.5 years. NHL, 5 years. Major League Baseball, 5.6 years. So if you think about it, in the big scheme of life, how long we actually live, that's not really a career, is it? It's just a really short chapter in this athlete's life. This morning, we're going to focus on that. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about that when it comes to our lives, that the things we chase after, like wealth and achievements and social status, all those things really are fleeting. It's like they're here today and they're gone tomorrow. And so how do we focus on what is truly important in our lives? And so we're going to do that as we continue our series in James. If you haven't been here, this is actually a 12-week series that we are in. We've broken it into 3 smaller series. The reason is, when you look at James, and scholars say this, James really is a bunch of different teachings, snippets of teachings that this guy named James shares. And so in these snippets, we have all these amazing things that we can use in our daily life. That's why we call this series Playbook. There are plays from James that we can live out in our own lives, as many of us try to do the best we can to follow Jesus. And so what we did is we took this book and we broke it into 3 different sections, 3 different parts. And so last week we just finished 4 weeks on our words, and today we're going to finish this last 3 weeks. And I'll be honest with you, we're going to talk about wealth, okay? And some of you are like, Chad, don't you have a heart? Many of us right now are going through a really hard time. We're furloughed, and I found out that can mean many different things. And I know that's difficult. And I'm just going to invite you to stay with me, because I believe when we get to the end of this, you're really going to see that even going through a tough time right now, there's something we can learn from James in what we're going to focus on today, okay? We're going to be in James chapter 1, starting with verse 9. I'm going to read through verse 11. Here's what it says. Believers who are poor have something to boast about, for God has honored them. And those who are rich should boast that God has humbled them. They will fade away like a little flower in the field. The hot sun rises and the grass withers. The little flower droops and falls, and its beauty fades away. In the same way, the rich will fade away with all their achievements. Now, for us to understand this, we've talked about this throughout this series, we really have to understand the context that James is written in. And we've talked about some of these things. But let me start here. James isn't written as a theological textbook, okay? It's actually a letter. We've talked through this. It's a letter that he writes to Jewish Christians. This is a group of people who grew up Jewish. They know the Jewish rituals and laws, and they've followed these their whole life. This guy named Jesus shows up. They become followers of Jesus, and so now they're following his way. And that made the religious leaders pretty upset. These religious leaders said, no, Jesus isn't the Messiah. Jesus isn't who you're supposed to follow. You're still supposed to be following us. And because these people aren't changing their ways, because they're still saying, no, Jesus is this Messiah, these religious leaders begin to persecute them. They begin to arrest them. They begin to throw them in jail. Some of them they even kill because of this belief that they have in Jesus. So here's this group of people who've lost everything, right? They've left Jerusalem and the surrounding areas. They've scattered all throughout the Roman Empire to get away from this persecution, which means they've left incomes and jobs and homes and even family connections because they have this faith that Jesus is the Messiah. And so in this letter, James isn't writing to people who show up to church like twice a year, right? On Christmas and Easter. He's writing to a group of people that are exiled. He's writing to a group of people that are far away from things and places and people that they love, all because of this faith. And really, they're suffering because of the faith they have in Jesus. And so this is who James is writing to here. But there's also this underlying message. We've been talking through this. James is saying, hey, remember who you are. Remember whose you are. Remember what's been planted in your heart. Remember that these teachings of Jesus, that you becoming a follower of Jesus because of that. Remember that that's been planted in you. And what's been planted in you is so, so important. Don't forget that you are God's. Don't forget that your lives are all connected to what God wants for you. Don't forget what's been planted in you. And so in this context, James writes these words here in chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. What is he trying to say, though? What is he trying to convey to his audience? He's actually echoing something or someone that he knows really well. His half-brother, Jesus. We've talked about this a little bit at the very beginning of the series, if you were here, that James is actually the half-brother of Jesus. But James did not believe that Jesus was this Messiah. I mean, he grew up with the guy, right? Jesus would walk around and say, hey, you are all sinners, and they would give him wedgies for this. I mean, can you imagine, kind of think about what it would have been like to be Jesus' brother in those days? And so he's his half-brother, doesn't believe Jesus is this Messiah until Jesus is crucified and is resurrected. And then he becomes this follower of, again, his half-brother, but the Messiah, who's Jesus. And so here we have James in verses 9 through 11, who's been very versed in the teachings of Jesus, okay? I said this early on that James was written about 10 years after the resurrection of Jesus. So he's had a long time to learn the teachings of Jesus. And he's taken these teachings and he's actually using them to encourage these followers of Jesus that are scattered all over the place. As we read this passage in James chapter 1, it might seem a little bit familiar to us. And it probably should be, because it's thought that Jesus, or James actually takes part of the Beatitudes that Jesus uses in Matthew chapter 5. We find it in Matthew chapter 5 and Luke chapter 6. He uses these Beatitudes to expand on them here in the book of James, okay? Now, what are these Beatitudes? Jesus gives these Beatitudes very early on in his ministry. It's actually right after he chooses his 12 disciples. He shares these teachings. Now, what we find is that even though at that point Jesus was very early on in his ministry, he already had a large group of people, a large crowd that was following him everywhere that he would go. Now, why are they doing this? Well, one reason is his teachings were very different than the religious leaders. The religious leaders of the day were like, here's the rules, here's the laws, this is what you should do and how you should live your life. Jesus jumps in and is like, yeah, but there's actually freedom in following me. Like, there's some things that are important that we do, but there's this freedom that's there. And that was very different than these religious leaders were teaching. The other piece to this was that Jesus had incredible love and compassion for everybody. They're not seeing that from the religious leaders of that day. They're not experiencing that from the religious leaders. And so for Jesus to come and for them to experience this incredible compassion and love was very, very different. So they're really eager to follow Jesus and to listen to Jesus and to learn from Jesus. Now, this particular day, this event takes place where Jesus shares these Beatitudes. There's not a whole lot of influencers that are there. Not a whole lot of landowners that are showing up. You're not finding a lot of CEOs and VIPs there that day. The people that are present are day laborers. They're slaves. They're overlooked. They're afterthoughts. They're outcasts. And of course, they're poor. They're trying to survive day to day. They're trying to figure out how are we going to feed ourselves? How are we going to feed our family? It's a group of people that society has forgotten. But there's another piece of this. These individuals who are showing up that day, the majority of them, they know there's no better life. It's not like they had some company ladder they could climb up. It's not like they could go invest in Bitcoin and hope that it just blew up, right? They couldn't go play the lottery and hope they won. This wasn't how things worked in those days. They were pretty much stuck in their status in society in those days, which meant you had very little hope. But then this Jesus guy shows up, and you listen to his teachings, and what is he bringing? Like, he's bringing this incredible message of hope, right? So these Beatitudes that Jesus shares are all about this message of hope. I'm going to look at how Jesus begins both of these, one in Luke chapter 6 and one in Luke chapter 5. Let me throw this out there just to confuse you even more. Some scholars say these are two different events that take place based on some details right before this. Others say it's the same thing, that Luke and Matthew are coming from these things from different perspective. However you want to see this is great. Whatever the case is, here's Jesus actually sharing these Beatitudes, whether it's once or twice. My guess is he shared them more often. We just don't have record of that. But let's look at both of these. Luke chapter 6, verse 20. Jesus said, God blesses you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. And then in Matthew 5:3, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Kind of a little side note, practice for you, if you will. When you read Jesus' words in Scripture, do you have a Jesus voice? Right? You do, don't you? Like, you're reading it and you come to Jesus' words and you're like, oh, yeah, this is the way Jesus would have sounded. And maybe for some of you, it's like the general British accent. Because I think a lot of the early movies about Jesus, they were always British actors. Maybe some of you have like angry voice Jesus, because you always think Jesus is angry all the time. My guess is most of us have soft talker Jesus, don't we? That when we're reading something like this here in the Beatitudes, we probably read it like, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Right? That's how we probably read Jesus or hear Jesus' voice in our minds. And you're probably thinking, there better be a point to this. And there is, okay? Here's the point here. These Beatitudes are actually powerful statements Jesus is making. They're so powerful that they really are going to set the tone for the rest of his ministry, and they're going to set the tone for allowing people to understand why God had sent him. He's not soft-talking these Beatitudes. He's not using a British accent, as far as we know, okay? And he's not using this angry voice, because these Beatitudes are actually exclamations that he's making. He's saying these like he's on the top of this roof, and he's just shouting it for everybody to hear. So if Jesus is saying these in that form, it'd probably be more like this. God blesses you who are poor, for the kingdom of God is yours. Or blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Like, he's shouting these out for everyone to hear. But why is it important for the group that's there to hear this? Well, we talked a little bit earlier that the majority of the people that are there that day are poor. But there's another piece to this. I talked about this early on in this series, that as they've done research back to that time period, the Roman Empire, that about 60% of the people who lived in that day lived in poverty. And so if Jesus shows up, and Jesus, the first words he said is like, hey, God blesses the poor. Blessed are you that are poor. If you're in that crowd that day, you're probably going to listen. And not only are you going to listen, you're going to sit there and you say, he's actually talking to me. And it's because Jesus is turning their world upside down. What is he giving them? He's giving them hope. They look around and think, our lives are hopeless. And here's Jesus who shows up and gives them hope. The world says depend on yourself, because the more you have, the more you're worth, right? And that's probably the mentality that this group of people there that day has. But Jesus jumps in and says, the more you depend on God, the richer your soul. I love how N.T. Wright pastor and author puts it. He said, Luke gives us the raw edge of Jesus' message, and Matthew gives us its refined heart. Here's Luke who's emphasizing the hurt, right? The physical poverty that they're going through. And then Matthew's emphasizing the heart. He's saying, hey, there's a spiritual humility that God calls his followers to. So these words would have resonated with the people that were there that day. But I think it's important to kind of understand some of the words that Jesus uses here. He uses this word blessed. See, God blesses or blessed here. Not a bad translation, but a better translation is happy or fortunate. So as we read those words, what Jesus is really saying, hey, happy are you who are poor. Fortunate are you who are poor. He's shouting this for them to hear, and what he's saying to them is something they've never heard before. Like, you should be happy because you are poor. You should feel fortunate because you are poor. Again, sounds very different than the teachings that they had learned from their Jewish leaders. James actually takes this idea, okay, and he expands on it here, using those Beatitudes as his backdrop for what we read in verses 9 through 11. James says, believers who are poor have something to boast about, for God has honored them. Poor believers should boast about being poor. Is he saying you should walk around like, hey, look at me, I'm poor, you should look at me very special? That's not what he's saying at all. What he's saying is they should boast because they have to be fully dependent on God. Right? There's no welfare system then. There's no SNAP benefits for them. There's nothing like that in place to help them out. The Roman government doesn't care about them. Their Jewish leaders don't care about them. And so they have to be dependent on someone. And who is that? They can depend on themselves. But here's James just saying, be fully dependent on God. Feel fortunate that you are where you are. And his reasoning is, hey, think about this. You don't have to fight loyalties, right? You don't have to say, on the one hand, I've got all this money in my bank account, and I've gotten this place because of myself, and so I can be dependent on myself, or I can choose to be dependent on God if I want to. He's not saying that. He's like, hey, you don't have this. You don't have the financial means. And so what are you going to be dependent on? And for James, he's saying be dependent on God. And because you have to have this the full dependence on God, realize that you are fortunate and be happy about it. In a world like ours where we put out highlight reels to share with everybody and talk about how great our lives are, and in a culture where we're measured by what's in our wallets, James is saying your highlight reels actually aren't important. How thick or thin your wallet is, it doesn't matter. What you should boast in is about what's in your heart. Like, do you fully depend on God? You're blessed not because of what you don't have. You're blessed because of whose you are. And so if you're there that day and you're the majority of the people there, like, these words from Jesus are just going to, again, they're going to resonate with you. They're going to hit you deep down. But Jesus doesn't stop there, right? He makes a statement to the rich that are there too. Look at verse 10. It says, and those who are rich should boast that God has humbled them. They will fade away like a little flower in the field. The hot sun rises and the grass withers. The little flower droops and falls, and its beauty fades away. In the same way, the rich will fade away with all their achievements. Fiscal year ending June 30th, 2025, over the course of the last year, Americans, we spent $91 billion on lottery tickets. Why do we spend so much money on lottery tickets? We want to get rich, right? Can we just be honest? That's what we want to do. But oftentimes it's not about the numerical value. It's about what we think these winnings will do for us. Because can we be honest? Probably most of us at one point in time have bought lottery tickets. And when you bought them, you planned out how you're going to spend the money, didn't you? I bought a couple of lottery tickets in my life. I know I've done that in the past. What do we think? It's going to fix all of our woes. That if we buy a lottery ticket, we're going to win and everything's going to be great. I'm going to be able to have freedom from my financial worries. I'm going to be able to actually spend some time and enjoy my life. I'm going to be able to care for loved ones that I've always wanted to help out. Or, I just want to kind of live a life of luxury for a little bit. And so we've already thought through what we would do with these lottery winnings. we have this belief that money is the answer to all of our ills. And yet James jumps in and is like, let me tell you about money a little bit. This is what it's like. It's like a flower. You wake up in the morning, it blooms, it's beautiful, it's gorgeous, and by the end of the day, it's wilted and it is dead. He's like, riches may be nice, and maybe it's good to have in some ways. It makes you feel good. You get a few more toys. You take a few exotic vacations. You get a few more square feet on your home, but wealth doesn't give you an ultimate security that you think it does. Those people then that are sitting there listening to Jesus that day, those people that are reading this letter from James, like money meant something to them. It gave you freedom. And what it gave you freedom from was slavery. What it gave you freedom from was that you knew that you would actually have a meal to eat that day. What it gave you freedom from was you didn't have to sell your body so that you could have a little bit of money to feed your family. That's what it would give you freedom for. And so money and wealth was an answer to their ills. Again, I don't think we're much different than that today, and that's why so often we go chasing after. And James comes in and is like, hey, money, resources, wealth is fleeting. And it doesn't bring the happiness you think it should. So here's James sharing this part of his teaching about wealth. But he brings in a little bit of Jesus' Beatitudes here in verses 10 and 11, and also a little bit of Old Testament wisdom. Let's look at the Beatitudes. Back to that a second. Luke chapter 6, verses 24 through 25. What sorrow awaits you who are rich? For you have your only happiness now. What sorrow awaits you who are fat and prosperous now? For a time of awful hunger awaits you. In this part of the Beatitudes, it's known as the woe statements. And I know when we hear that word woe, we're like, whoa, like I'm in trouble. The actual better definition or translation of that word woe is alas, or how terrible. I know that can still sound negative. But that term Jesus uses is an expression of regret and compassion. And so as Jesus is saying these words right here in the Beatitudes on this particular day, these woe statements, the majority of the people there, they're poor, right? And so this would have meant something to them because, one, they're struggling to survive day to day. And it was easy to believe that if you had wealth, that it would get you somewhere. And yet here's Jesus who's saying, let me tell you what the deal is with those that are wealthy. Like, I have this regret for the life they're living, the things they're chasing after. I have this incredible compassion for them because of what they think is going to bring them comfort. Because it's very easy when we have wealth to be more dependent on ourselves than to be dependent on God. And so here's James who's saying that, like, hey, wealth might be nice in some ways, but the reality is if you have this wealth, you may be more dependent on it than you're dependent on God. And by the way, the wealth you have, it's here today, and it's going to be gone tomorrow. James is connecting his writings there with these woes from Jesus. But he's also connecting it back to Old Testament wisdom. Remember, he's writing to these Jewish Christians. And they would have known what we call the Old Testament. That was kind of their Bible in those days. They would have known the songs out of the book of Psalms. And so part of this, James probably pulls from Psalms too. Look at Psalm 49. The songwriter writes, "So don't be dismayed when the wicked grow rich and their homes become ever more splendid. For when they die, they take nothing with them. Their wealth will not follow them into the grave. In this life, they consider themselves fortunate and are applauded for their success. But they will die like all before them and never again see the light of day. People who boast of their wealth don't understand. They will die just like animals." I'm sure this was a big hit back in those days, right? Kind of sounds like a country song. Dog died, girl left me, beer's warm, at least I got my truck, right? That's what it kind of sounds like. But this is what James is doing. He's actually pulling the teachings from Jesus, but also from these songs that these Jewish Christians would fully understand. They would have grown up hearing these their whole life. And so as he's writing this, he's talking to that group of people who are probably poor, but he's also talking to wealthy Christians. He's like, don't get too comfortable with what you have. Here today, gone tomorrow. And you can't take it with you. That's why I love what Billy Graham, great evangelist and pastor, he probably put it best. He says, you'll never see a U-Haul behind a hearse. I think that's very true. And that's really what James is getting to. Like, you can't take this stuff with you, so how are you using it today? Or even more succinctly, are you dependent on yourself or are you dependent on God? James looks at the rich and says, you might have material abundance, but you could still be spiritually poor. And he looks at the poor and say, you may be materially lacking, but you could be spiritually rich. And so as we kind of think through what James is writing here, what we're talking about this morning, I think there's a question for both the rich and poor that James was talking to, but also for us today. Am I dependent on me, or am I dependent on God? And so how do we take these words from James here, these 3 short verses, and how do we put them into our context, and how do we live these things out? Well, let me give you 3 ideas I think we can take with us from what James writes here. Here's the first one. Evaluate my relationship with money. Evaluate my relationship with money. Here's a couple other questions to ask yourself here. Does my money serve me, or do I serve my money? Am I dependent on my money to feel comfortable, to feel safe, to feel that like I'm keeping up with everybody else as a status symbol? Or am I dependent on God? That no matter what I do have or don't have, do I find my safety, my comfort, my worth through my connection and relationship with God? Maybe there's a little bit further question we can ask here. What would I change if I viewed my wealth or lack of wealth through the lens of eternity to come? Right? So often we think about this life, but what about if I'm thinking about eternity to come? How would I spend my money? Where would I invest it? What's my relationship with my money like? I believe this is a starting point for us to figure out, am I dependent on God, or am I dependent on myself? But here's the second thing I would say. Have an attitude of gratitude. Could be the reason that we are so dependent on ourselves and not God is we're not grateful for what we do have, whether that's a little or a lot. It's like we've forgotten how to look at what we do have and to be happy with it, no matter what it may be. Or to feel fortunate with it, no matter what it may be. Maybe we are never satisfied. Maybe we are never grateful. And so what would an attitude of gratitude look like for us? I'm going to give you a little challenge, okay? It's only 7 days, so it's not very long. I think we can do this. 7 days of gratitude, all right? What I'm asking is, whoever wants to do this, between today, this evening, through Saturday, I think that's 7 days, if my math is correct, right? For the next 7 days, at the end of your day, every single day, write down 3 things that you're thankful for. Write 3 things down that you're grateful for, that you're happy about. So again, if my math is correct, that should be 21 things. Now, you cannot repeat the same things. So 21 different things you're grateful for over the next 7 days. And this can't be stuff that money can buy, right? It can't be like, hey, I have Hulu and I get to watch ESPN and like Chad. That's not the kind of stuff we're talking about here. We're talking about stuff that actually matters. We're talking about family and relationships and friends and health, whatever it may be. Spend the next 7 days at the end of every single day, right before you go to bed, have notebook, pen there, or this is to be honest, we all have our phones with us right before we go to bed. Open your notes app, write down 3 things that you are grateful for, and do not repeat those things over the next 7 days. I would bet you, and I'm not a betting person, but I would bet if you took the time to do that this week and had these 3 things every single day you were grateful for, begin to change the way that we go through our day and the things that we focus on and that are important to us. Okay? Now, I say that, and I know there's a large group of you here this morning who are furloughed. And one of the things I've learned, that means many different things for everybody that is here. I want to first go back and reiterate a couple things that were said earlier. As a church, we are here for you, okay? That's why whatever needs you may have, financial needs, food needs, counseling needs, man, we'd love for you to hit us up at that website, that email address, care@thejourneynova.org. Please let us know. Now, I want to be honest with you just for a second. I know this is a room full of people that have incredible pride, okay? You don't want to ask for help because you think, well, they're going to help somebody else, or maybe I really don't need it. And it's hard to ask for help. And I will tell you, I'm a person full of pride. It's hard for me to ask for help, but that's not why the church exists. We don't exist to be a group of people full of pride that don't ask for help, okay? So whatever you're going through, whatever help we can give you, please do not hesitate to let us know. We want to be a church that takes care of each other, especially in times like this, all right? But I also know that many of you are going through some turmoil right now. You're probably angry. You're probably upset. There's probably some fear there, maybe a lot of doubt. And maybe in the midst of what's happening here right now, what we needed to be reminded of are the things we can be thankful for. Because it's easy to sit down and list all the things we're not thankful for, right? Like, here's what I'm going through, and there's these policies, and here's politicians, and there's all this stuff that's going on right now. I can give you a whole list of all these things that I'm not thankful for right now in this moment. Maybe what we need to say is, okay, I know that's there, but I need to have an attitude of gratitude. I need to change the way I'm thinking right now. What are the things that I can be grateful for? And maybe that just helps a little bit. And if it helps just a little bit in a tough time like this, man, I think that's worth it. But no matter whether we're furloughed, we don't have much, we got a lot. What James is talking about here is you and I being dependent on God. And we're not trying to figure this out on our own, but that we're being fully dependent on who God is in our lives. The last thing I would say is invest in what lasts forever. And it's just kind of changing the way that we view what we have. And again, maybe some of you have quite a bit. And in your mind, you can be thinking like, okay, hey, I know these individuals that I can help. I know this organization I can help. I believe in what a church is doing, and I want to help with that, whatever it may be for you. Maybe you have a little. And I will be honest with you, some of the most generous people I know in my life are people who have some of the least finances that I've ever seen, but they just believe, like, hey, there's something to this. And so maybe we can have an eternal accounting going on in our brains and begin to look around us and say, hey, this is what I can invest in to make a difference in the lives of others. Invest in what lasts forever. People you love, financial inequalities you want to rectify, whatever it may be. Think about that as you invest in what lasts forever. Because in those moments, we're fully dependent on God. When we started here just a little bit ago, I talked about professional athletes making millions of dollars a year and how their careers are short. They may make a lot of money, but in a few short years, the fame is gone, the cheering's not there anymore, those paychecks have stopped. And when we look at our own lives, it's easy for us to kind of get stuck in that same world thinking, hey, this is going to last forever. I'm going to be able to live this way forever, and I'm going to chase these things my whole life. I'm going to chase my career, my achievements, my possessions. And James says, no, it's just a flower. Here today, gone tomorrow. What truly lasts is a heart for people, a generous spirit, and a faith where we're focused on Jesus, where we are fully dependent on God, no matter how much we have or how much little we have. We're reminded of that because of Jesus Christ.